Welcome. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the selection sort algorithm. Let's get started. Today's learning goal is that we can explain the selection sort algorithm and use it to solve problems. Before we really discuss how selection sort works, we should probably talk about what it means to sort something. And the basic idea is this. When we have a lot of data, it can be hard to use, especially if it's disorganized, like this list of names you see on the screen. The data becomes sorted when it's put in a specific order, and in the case of names, oftentimes that would be alphabetical order. For us, sorting is going to be a three-step process. The first thing is we're going to have some data to sort. It could be numbers, it could be words, it could be anything. The second step is we have to decide what order we want to sort it in. Do we want numerical order? Is it going to be ascending, descending, alphabetical order, something else? And then finally, we're going to choose and implement a sorting algorithm. And remember, an algorithm is just a recipe or a process for doing something in computer science. And there's lots to choose from. Today, we're going to focus on selection sort. For us specifically today, our objective is going to be to take the array 849, -214, and sort it using selection sort from smallest to biggest. Let's talk about the basic strategy of selection sort. Remember, the goal is to put these numbers in order from smallest to biggest, and we'll begin by starting at the very beginning of the array and searching for the smallest value. And of course, the smallest value in this array is -2. Then we're going to swap the first element with the smallest element. So that means that the 8 and the -2 are going to switch places. At this point, we're done with the -2. The smallest element is in place. So we're going to start the process over, but this time starting at the second element. So we're going to search through the array and find the smallest value, which will be a 1. And then we're going to swap the second element with the smallest element. So the 4 and the 1 are going to switch places. The -2 and the 1 are exactly where they need to be. So now, starting with the third element, we'll find the smallest value. In this case, that's going to be a 4. And then we're going to take that third element and the smallest element and switch them. So the 9 and the 4 will swap. -2, 1, and 4 are now in place, so we'll go to the fourth element and we will search for the smallest element in the remainder of the list, which of course is a 4. Then we'll swap the fourth element with the smallest element, so the 4 and the 8 will switch. Now, everything has been put in order except the last two elements. So starting with the fifth element, we will search for the smallest, and in this case, that's an 8. And so our final step to put these in order is going to be to swap the fifth element with the smallest element. So the 9 and 8 will switch, and now our array is in order. Now that we know what selection sort does, we need to see how to code it. It's going to be a three-step process, and we're going to look at each step in detail. The first step is we need to walk through each index of the array up to the second to last element. And at each index, we need to look at the rest of the list to find the smallest number, the minimum. And then finally, we're going to have to take that smallest number and the number at index, and we're going to swap them to put that smallest number into place. Here's how we traverse each index up to the second to last element. Of course, it's a loop, and we want to start index at 0, and we want to loop while index is less than the array.length -1. That -1 is critical because we don't want to go to the last element. We only want to go to the second to the last. But why do we only want to go to the second to last element? Remember when we did our example earlier, we started at index 0 and put the -2 in place, and then the 1 and the 4 and the 4, and our last stop was the second to last element, the 9. And from the 9, we did our final linear search and found 8 was the smallest, and then we swapped them into place. And at that point, we were done. We never went past the second to last element. Now that we're traversing from 0 to the second to last element, for each of those indexes, we need to find the minimum in the rest of the list. We want to figure out where the smallest element in the remainder of the list is located. In other words, we want to know the index of the minimum value. And so to do that, we create a variable, int min_index, and initially we give it the same value of index. So assuming that we're starting at the very beginning of the list with our selection sort, index is 0, min_index is also going to be 0. It's possible that the element at index 0 is already the smallest, but it's probably not. So we need to check the rest of the array using a loop. Notice that this loop starts out with the int I variable at index plus 1, meaning that we're going to start at the 4, the second element, and look through the rest of the list for the smallest item. Inside of our loop, we have an if statement. And this if statement is going to compare the element at index I to the element at index min_index. Basically, we're going to check all of the things in the rest of our list to see if they're smaller than our smallest thing. And if we find that an element is smaller than our smallest, then we'll update the min_index to location I. So by the end of this loop, min_index will be updated a couple of times, but it will end up at index 3, which is the location of our smallest element. So the outer loop runs through all the elements from the beginning to the second to the last, and then the next chunk of code and loop and if statement, that searches for the location of the smallest element. The last thing we need to do is swap the element at the index and the min_index. In order to do our swap, we will use 3 lines of code. The first thing we'll do is we'll make a temporary variable and set it equal to the element at spot index. So that means that temp is going to be 8. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the element at spot index. So that 8 is going to be replaced by a -2. Now, at this point, we have 2 -2s in the array and no 8s. This is why we created the temporary variable, because now we haven't lost the 8. And so the last line of code says go to the array at spot min_index and set it equal to temp. And with these 3 lines of code, we are swapping the element at spot index and the element at spot min_index. Here is the complete code for selection sort. Let's do a quick understanding check. The code that we have will sort numbers from smallest to biggest. What would we have to change to sort the other way, from largest to smallest? Pause the video, think about it, and when you're ready, resume and we'll check our answer. The only thing we would need to do to make this sort from largest to smallest is change our less than to a greater than in our if statement. You may also want to change the variable min_index to something else like max_index, because technically we wouldn't be finding the smallest thing, we'd be finding the biggest, but the only thing you have to change is the less than to a greater than. Now that you've watched this lesson, you should be able to explain the selection sort algorithm and use it to solve problems.